All right. So I'm trying to mm, I'm trying to figure out how I want to do all this because look, I'm a researcher. All right, a scientist, an engineer, whatever. I'm not a content creator in the abstract. So, that being said, I'm trying to figure out like what's the best way to present everything because like I don't want to be in the last video I was standing in front of my bed. Look, it's a small I call it my lab. All right? It's better than bedroom I barely sleep in. Um, so we're gonna get this figured out, all right, and we're gonna see where this goes because I'm really interested to see where this can all go. And here I am looking at a blank whiteboard. All right, give me a second to get my head together. Okay, so as I said, it's a bit of a process to get this all figured out. But one of the things I couldn't figure out in my last video was, like I call the human brain the sapien circuit, right? Homo sapiens, everything is a circuit, blah, 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 blah. I'm very mechanistic. So you have common repeated things in the mammalian circuit. That's the limbic, default mode network, roughly the structure of the brain, etc., stuff like that. But what I couldn't figure out was like the name for mice and rats and stuff like that. Turns out it's called the the murine, I think it is, the murine circuit. That's lab mouse and rats and stuff like that. Very, very well studied brain. Nearly completely mapped out, almost axon for axon. I mean, it is very, very, thousands of different kinds of cells, millions of axons, dendrites, and somas. It's very complex, but you don't need the granularity of the cellular structure so much as you need the rough shape of the behavioral emergence, right? The patterns that make the system work. That's the wiring, the topology, how things wire into each other, which way data flows, for example, stuff like that. Because when it comes to a brain, you don't have, and this is my biggest gripe, a giant model for a brain. You don't. You have individual tiny pieces that make up the brain that are all working and conceptually ticking at their own paces. And then you have, phase locks, right? So you have different levels of, what do you call it? Come on, bear with me here. Wave patterns, signal propagation, oscillations, theta, beta, alpha, gamma, etc. Right? Those things are repeated. The brain as a concept, as a structure, millions of years old. Humans, 300,000, but lab mice, we don't have to sit here and play the whole game of is it conscious, blah blah blah. Yes, everything's conscious to some degree of their own maximum potential, right? I mean, even humans, like I said before, a large majority tend to be NPCs in the vague sense of they live within a very small world. They don't push themselves. They have never been pushed, and they exist in a little routine, pretty much through complacency, really. And that's not that that's a bad thing. Don't get me wrong, but there are those of us that go above and beyond at all times for whatever reason, whether it be abuse, uh, the way you grew up. It really doesn't matter. But the quirks of the sapien circuit are monstrous. It's really hard to nail down everything, but that's why we're doing the lab mouse. Now, I have built, as I said before, 25 iterations of different brain architectures to really narrow down the turn sig. That's my six gated latch. Ooh, I always mess up the terminology. It's a six latch gated mechanism that acts. I call it a digital particle because it's useless on its own, but when in colonies, it works really emergently well. That's one particle. I'll get into all this. It's one particle that every single one has an identified lambda attached to it so that when data flows into it, it kicks off its lambda, compares all the blah, 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 blah. We'll get into that in the next video. I'm not going to blow up this one for that. But why? Why the lab mouse? right? Part of it is honestly simply because I have built bits and pieces of the frontal lobe. I have, the thing that learns to play. I'll probably put this in the video, hopefully, but the thing that learns to play Mario and then learns to play Contra without blowing up, meaning its associative memory is correlating a lot without having to relearn new things. The fact that it can go play Mario and then go play Contra and then attempt to kill an enemy by jumping on it, learning that that's not the right approach, and then learning how to shoot, learning new controls with only less than 1% of the total wiring being added, which was 30,000 connections. So because of that, and then the fact that the same brain can go and read a book, because I have my hands on the Gutenberg archive, it can read Alice, for example, and start forming lexical associations. And then it can go and see me through my webcam and hear me through my microphone, and I can see exactly where its eye is pointing, and it focuses on me, for example. And I'll show you some examples along the way. But the hard part is that it's been 10 months of nonstop 16 hours almost every day, bouncing back and forth between my day job and my company. And Blackfall is a private applied research institute that I founded. So what we fail to do at Blackfall is get the correct structure. We get closer and closer and closer every day, absolutely. But it's still a lot of guesswork. The human brain is not the simplest thing to reproduce. It's not divine, I'll tell you that, but it is complex. It's 300,000 plus years of trial and error, and then you factor in the communication and stuff like that. So why the lab mouse? And that is because, as I said, it's one of the most studied things. Here's what it offers, right? In a lab mouse alone, we have observed strategy, planning, goals, reward, danger, preferences, personality, rest, mapping, memory, spatial awareness, and bonding. What backs that up? The cerebellum, the frontal lobe, olfactory bulbs, vision, hearing, motor, limbic, I'll get into these, the default mode network, the hardest one, hypotheses, hypothetical generation of like, is this going to work or is that going to work? Should I go left or should I go right? And then you also have grid and place cells that have been observed. And those are tiny little things that activate when it's in a familiar space. When you drop a mouse into a maze and it starts learning and figuring itself out and stuff like that, then that's where we start to look at the lab mouse, right? I have produced, to some degree, the salticid brain, because the salticid, a jumping spider, was one of my most scariest things because of how small it is and yet the emergent quirks of curiosity that it shows. But even then, that's still a lot of guesswork because it's not to the same degree of research as the humble lab mouse. The lab mouse, the human brain, a dog brain, a cat brain, they're really not too dissimilar. They all function relatively the same way because some way, somehow, the same working mechanisms continuously appeared in evolution over and over and over and over again from the same ancestor that I guess had the first primordial brain, but I'm not entirely sure for mammals. So when you have all of these, then you have our end goal, which is, the whole system is called an astromind. It's supposed to be a tiny, compact, pluggable system that you can plug into anything and it just starts figuring itself out no matter what it's attached to. Now, binding that and everything else, yes, it's safe. Don't worry. But the key thing is, you don't train an astromind. That is very key. You let it experience the world. It ticks continuously. It's not like an LLM or a model or traditional floating point math. I threw all of that out because I knew that was wrong. Floating point matrices, you need a GPU if you want real efficiency, and that's already a problem, right? If you can't plug it into anything that happens to have a CPU, then you're already failing. So that's kind of where I've come at with my cognitive architecture is I've looked at Collins and Lampe spreading activation network. I've looked at all these different things over decades of neuroscience, decades of cognitive architecture, decades of AI research, and I decided, you know what? LLMs, as they stand today, they can have the AI term. Everyone wants to call them AI, have at it, but it's not AI. But we're not going to sit here and try to win that battle anymore. I'm tired of it. I really am. Lian Chun coined machine intelligence. I chose Turnsick intelligence, simply so I'm in my own field, right? I got to pioneer my own shit. It is what it is. And I guess the next video, I don't want to make these too long, so I'm just doing them as like a devlog. I'm trying to get up to the point where actually building the brain, right? How to build it. Because I've done it so many times. I've built a C. elegans worm. I built a brain with 302 neurons so rich that the brain simply would keep dying if I didn't give it the 3D body that gave it the sensory feedback to stay alive. So I'll put that up too. I gotta find all these things in my archive, but it's not a question of can I build a lab mouse brain. That's what this series is dedicated to. The answer is yes. The question is how, and we'll report that along the way. It's going to be a very interesting thing. I don't even know if I'm going to be really making use of the green screen, to be honest. I just wanted something that I could have stable behind me. I don't know. Because the actual thing is just a closet behind me. It's a very small room. But, I've seen people make content out of RVs. So we're going to roll with it. We're going to see what happens. And we're going to go from there. The Murine Circuit. How exciting. I probably missed some points along the way. I'm sorry about that.